You're rocking, excellent. So, 20 years on, how does it sound to you now?
Well, of course, I haven't actually listened to the live stuff. Well, I've listened to a few tracks because it's in the process of being mixed. James Guthrie's mixing it at the moment in his hovel in wherever he lives. I know the name of it. It's in California, Lake Tahoe. But from what I've heard, it sounds all right.
How does it differ from the recorded, from the album?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to finding that out when I hear the rest of it. But the bits that I heard, there was the first half of the show had to be elongated in order to give the chaps time to finish building the wall. So there's a sort of strange medley of a recapitulation of certain themes from the first half of the piece towards the end, just before Goodbye Cruel World. And I confess I'd forgotten that entirely. It came as something of a surprise when I listened to the mix.
So how does it, I mean, how many times did you actually, in concert, do the wall, the whole show?
I hadn't the faintest idea. I could guess. I would say 24, maybe. We did a week in LA, a week in Nassau Coliseum in New York, a week in Earls Court, and a week in Dortmund. That's 28, so I'm already above. Or maybe we did 6 nights in each of those. And then we went back in 81 into Earls Court and did a few more days, because by that point we were making the movie, and in the original plan for the movie, there was planned that there would be some live footage when Michael Saracen was the director. And that footage still exists. 70 we did 3 songs in 70mm.
Is that in this Earls Court Live? Is that part of the show?
I'm sure it will get used, yeah. So, you know, it's in a chest under my bed. Well, not literally, figuratively, you understand.
Why did you pick Earls Court to shoot the film in?
Oh, it's just a venue that we were very used to working in London. And the show was designed to fit in that kind of an arena. It might, in retrospect, have been more fun to do it somewhere more interesting.
Was it what's the technical difficulties in putting something like that on stage? I mean, obviously you stayed in one place for a week because it was just such a big deal. You couldn't something you just pick up and move, is it?
Yeah, there were considerable. I remember going to Culver City when we were before the first shows, where Mark Fisher and Jonathan Park were testing out the kind of wall building equipment for the first time. And there's a big soundstage in Culver City, and going in through the doors, and you couldn't hear yourself think, this horrendous noise, and the noise like screeching, grinding, metal tearing noise. And it was the noise of the lifts carrying the platforms for the guys to build the wall on, going up and down. And they just, when they were first erected, they made this I mean, it would have been impossible to do gig, and they just sent them up and brought them down again 24 hours a day for 4 or 5 days, just greasing and greasing and greasing and greasing and wearing them in until they stopped making the noise. But it was a bit of a worry to start with.
What's the centerpiece of the stage? Could you describe that? You know, the wall, the how.
Well, the live show, it was we built wall in to the sides, and that was fixed and solid. And then over on stage left, at the extremity of the solid bit, was the anchorage for the Messerschmitt, model Messerschmitt. It was about 20-foot wingspan that came flying in at some point. And that had to be anchored solidly because it had explosives and stuff. But then from there on in, the central portion of the stage was, I think, 3 separate. No, maybe that's Berlin. Maybe in the original one it was just one huge span of lift that went up however far it had to go up. So men could get onto it with these cardboard bricks, and it would go up, and they'd put them on, and then it would go down again. So, and that was the biggest thing mechanically. But if you wanted to really know about that, you'd have to ask Jonathan or Mark, because they built it.
See, this is quite advanced. I mean, this is what you were doing here on stage is more than anybody had ever done before.
Or since.
Really?
Well, I think so, yeah. Maybe not in terms of tonnage, but I think most of the sets since have been fairly static. Of course, the Stones copied all the inflatable stuff. Well, I say copied, they didn't. They just started to use Mark and Jonathan, and then Mark on his own, I think, because they've split up now, Mark and Jonathan. For some of the... I remember Jagger coming to see the show in Nassau Coliseum, and you could see his eyes popping out of his head. He was going, I want one. How's that done? I want it. Whatever it is, I want some. And scurrying round backstage going, who designed that? Wasn't it you? And finally he must have discovered, who the chaps were who built it, and employed them for a number of tours.
Was that sound very important in the stadium situation as well?
Well, it was, I have to say. Yeah, you need a proper PA and, cord and all of that. But even in those old days, they were quite good at building PAs. Not as good as they are now. I mean, I've just been on the road this summer, and the PA, Clare Brothers PA that I used in the States was unbelievable. It's much more focused. They've worked out how to, shine one bit at these blokes here and another bit at them and them, so that it's smart. You get as clean and as loud a sound with much less equipment.
Maybe we should do that then.
It would have been good.
Okay, the wall, the actual, where did the original idea for the story come from?
Well, there's two ideas. One, the idea of building a wall across the front of a stage with a rock and roll band on this side and an audience on the other came to me in a flash of angst in the Olympic Stadium in Montreal at the end of the Animals tour in 1977, where we were playing only football stadiums, and I had become disenchanted with that arrangement, in that it had nothing to do with anything anymore except numbers, numbers of dollars and numbers of people. And so, and I famously kind of flipped on stage at a certain point and spat at some poor youth who was trying to scrabble up the front of the stage. And after that show, in a state of some depression, I thought, oh, this is crazy. What am I doing here? How have I been reduced to this, or allowed myself to be reduced to this? And it was that night or the following day that I suddenly thought, hey, maybe one could do a show where I expressed this sense of alienation that I had by constructing a... And then I started doing some drawings, backs of cigarette packets sitting in the bottom of my dugout in the time-honoured fashion. And the rest is history. The story of the piece then, which developed, because I then had to start thinking, well, where is this wall from? It can't just be about that. It can't just be about my disenchantment with the scale of the gigs that we're doing. It must be about something else. So I started to think about the personal walls and how we protect ourselves and from pain and all of that. So the rest of the story was mainly autobiographical, with a few dollops of Syd Barrett and Led Zeppelin thrown in, I suppose. Led Zeppelin being, the smashing of rooms and all that sort of childish nonsense. Yeah, all of that fun and games.
The schoolmaster, is that a representation of what you felt about school as well?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's not. It's a kind of gestalt image made up of a number of the schoolmasters that I encountered in my grammar school. I don't know how schools have changed to some extent since then, but they were very much at the time. They were concerned with university entrance and kind of scoring points at that level, and they felt that the best way to do that was to, beat or shame or in any way they could cajole infants into achieving good A-level results. And in my case, and in the case of a number of my peers, it was pretty counterproductive, and we became a little bit rebellious, I think I would have to say. And a lot of them did try and employ that, shaming techniques, especially when we were young enough to not just tell them to fuck off, and it was unpleasant. And
the imagery of of Pink's dilemma and his mental state as representing the physical, the rock. I mean, was it really that bad touring? Did you find it really, claustrophobic? Because, I mean, there must be moments where you did enjoy doing it, but obviously.
Touring?
Yeah.
No, touring really is a doddle. It's I always smile when people say, "Oh, it must be so hard touring," and the terrible pressure, and there isn't any. By comparison with getting up and going to work in a factory, there's no pressure at all. And by and large, if the band's reasonably successful, somebody bangs on the door at noon and says, leave in half an hour, chaps, and then you get in a limousine and go and get on a private aeroplane, and someone in a tight skirt serves you canapes and Highland Spring until you arrive in the next town where you might go and have play a set of tennis or something, and then off to the sound check. And making sure everything's all right, which by and large it is, because you're usually working with professional people who take their jobs very seriously and get everything together. So you do a bit of a sound check and then have something to eat and then do a gig for a couple of hours. And that's where it starts getting hard, is what happens after the gig. And it is true that because you've turned on the adrenaline tap, you do tend to be flying at 11 o'clock when you come off stage. But
what do you do with that?
Well, a lot of the chaps would party then for most of the, for the rest of the night, and then it's into the whole, all the addictions come out, and that's what screws people up, is that that used to screw people up, is that they'd stay up all night, snorting coke and fucking and all those things that debilitate you in the end. Turn around, and so that's why they come back off the road looking shagged out, because they are, But the actual job is a doddle. It really is, and great and terrific fun as well. Up to a point. I mean, in the very early days of touring, we were doing quite small auditoriums. You were talking about LA earlier. There used to be a gig there called the Civic Auditorium at Spee, and they're all over. And they're like 3,000 or 4,000 people, and there's an audience who've just kind of discovered you, and there's a certain reverence there, and they want to hear what it is that you're doing, and so they sit quietly and listen to it, with their mouths open, going, "Oh wow, this is cool," and it's the same audience. The first time I went to see Springsteen, which was I don't know what year, but he was playing the Hammersmith Odeon, which is a little place, and you could have heard a pin drop in there, except when he stopped playing and you're supposed to applaud. And that's what it was like, and it was wonderful. It was very moving and very encompassing, and there was a great feeling of connection, and there was a sort of sense of community. But then, for us anyway, after Dark Side of the Moon, suddenly everybody knows who you are, so they all come to the gig, and only 50% of them are even faintly interested in what you're doing. They're there because it's the thing to do. So they go and they get pissed, and they think that the thing rock and roll audiences are supposed to do is shout and whistle all the time, which they still do to this day. I even had that in relatively smaller venues on the tour that I've just done, and it's a pain in the arse. It must be unbearable for people who are in the audience who've come to listen if you've got some arsehole standing next to you going all the way through everything,
Senselessly.
Senselessly, mindlessly, hopelessly, They all do this weird thing where they go, oh my God, please go home, and let's get on with it. Happily, these days they're in a small enough minority, and I think I've developed to the point where I can just kind of block them out, you know. I used to find it necessary to try and stop them, and that's hopeless.
Really?
Yeah, that's like a gnat standing in front of a steamroller, you know, going, stop! Doesn't work.
But Pink's dilemma is still relevant to today, isn't it? It's an ongoing...
Well, the thing about turning into the fascist swine, you know, I think if you allow your kind of, if we all have some natural human decency, if you allow that to be crushed beneath the weight of the numbers of people and money, and so that what becomes important to you is the numbers rather than the connection, then the chances are that you will regress into some less attractive form of life than you were originally. And one might be that picture that we drew with, you know, with Geldof, or me actually in the first shows, this kind of ranting demagogue, intent on joining in with the inherent sadomasochism that is implicit in all this, you know, all this kind of monkey stuff that they do. In fact, one of the scenes that I wrote in the original idea for the movie was actually of an audience being bombed, you know, and as the bombs fall and they're blown to bits, the closer they are to the epicenter of the destruction, the more they like it, you know, the more they cheer. You know, I love this idea of a bloke with only one arm because it's been blown, cheering with the other one. Yeah, I'm part of the show. Yeah, it's very Python-esque, but it's sort of, that was kind of the feeling that I had, that in a way the more uncomfortable they could make it for themselves, the better they liked it.
Did you work close with Alan Parker on the movie?
Yeah, we did. We then, I mean, all of that really got pushed to one side when he came on board, because he was very clear. The vision that he brought to it was that it should be not have any footage of rock and roll bands playing at all, and certainly not us, but that it should be a much more straightforward and kind of attempt at a straightforward narrative. I nearly said linear. Obviously it's not linear, but it is a fairly straightforward piece of storytelling. Or that's what it developed into. And that's kind of what he brought to the project. And the way it worked was that he and Jerry Scarf and I would all go round to Scarf's house and sit in a room, and you know, and they would, well, Parker mainly would kind of drill me about my life, and as I sat there recounting anecdotes from my youth, he'd go, "Oh, that would be a good scene," you know, and we'd sort of jot things down.
Was it good for you to get that out of the system, or did you find
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it was both cathartic and therapeutic to a certain extent, working on the whole piece.
Father and the war,
All of that stuff.
all that stuff. Okie doke. How did the war, I mean, in your words, how did it differ from other Pink Floyd shows?
It was more coherent, I think, would be the best way of describing it. I'd been working towards that show through the previous several shows. The one before was Animals, which had a lot of stuff going on, because that was the first one where we'd used inflatables and things, and so there was lots of kind of pigs flying about and you know, and inflatables popping open. I remember we had a kind of a family of a mother and a father and 2.4 children. It was this inflatable child kind of cut through the middle like that, and a fridge that burst open, and a Cadillac, and just to sort of fill up space in the air in the stage. And that was where the pig appeared for the first time, and you know, we used to fill it with propane and explode it and all that stuff. But they were more, that was more a question of creating tableaus to illustrate various songs within the context of the piece, Animals. And we would do, in that show we would do, Animals would be the second half of the show, and the first half of the show would be Wish You Were Here, because that was a habit that we'd got into doing. You do the new album and then the one before that, and nothing else, which was quite uncompromising and rather good, I thought. That's what you see, you get these two pieces and that's all you get. So Animals had a lot of stuff. I mean, it had some wonderful stuff in it. Wilf Scott, this pyrotechnician, he made these things that we only used a couple of times that were fantastic. He made firework sheep for the song Sheep, and they were fired out of mortars that were about like 6-inch mortars, like big tubes like this, and there were banks of 9 of them, I think. And what happened was they'd go boom, shoot this thing 1,000 feet up into the air, which one would go. But what was left then was a 5-foot-long kind of tissue paper sheep. So it was a parachute in the shape of a sheep, and with weights in its feet. And if you fired 9 of them off, which we did in kind of salvos, you'd get these 9 sheep kind of floating down from 1,000 feet up, depending on which way the wind blew. And they were stunning. They were absolutely wonderful. I would stand on stage. Oh, they're wonderful. But then when it came to the wall, it was no longer just kind of isolated tableau. I mean, there was a certain structure in the Animal show, but compared with the wall, nothing. This really was really thought out and had a beginning and a middle and an end when the whole thing fell down and was pretty coherent.
So the wall show is just the wall completely in its entirety, as more of a theatre, really, was it? Rather than just a rock?
It was theatre, yeah. It was proper theatre, and with a lot of projection of Jerry did all that animation to project on the face of the wall in the second half, and then the wall was pierced in certain ways to provide at least some entertainment in the second half of the show, because most of the second half of the show, the band played like that, with the wall 3 feet away in front of them.
So what did you see at this point? Was it
Well, I was actually dodging around most of the time. It was the rest of them who were kind of locked in cages at the back, apart from the bit where Dave goes up on the top and he played the solo of Comfortably Numb from sort of the top of the wall. But most of the time they were stuck in these cages. They had to have cages because the concrete bricks were, not concrete, cardboard were quite heavy, and at the end some of them inevitably fell backwards, and so they were all in these kind of steel cages to protect them from the carnage at the end of the show. But the hotel room would flap out of the front of the wall, and so I would sing Nobody Home and Don't Leave Me Now, I think, from there, and there was a lot of dashing about, and just like real theatre.
What's a high point for you as far as the songs go in the show, the part of the programme that you enjoyed the most?
I don't know. I thought it was all great, to be honest with you. I liked the stuff in the hotel room. Used to do Nobody Home in there. And it had a false perspective and a hole in the back with a Tropicana motel sign. The Tropicana being a famous old motel in Los Angeles. There were some other moments that were very dramatic. Dave's solo in Comfortably Numb, where he was backlit by very powerful, lights, so that he was kind of just this blank white wall, this one small figure here, and these lights shining out from behind. That was pretty spectacular. And of course, when it fell down at the end, watching the faces of the audience in the first 3 rows was quite, because they were terrified. Because it looked as if it was going to get them, and sometimes it did. We never killed anybody, but yeah. And we moved on. By the time I did it in Berlin, we'd moved on from cardboard to polystyrene, and it was a lot safer. But these cardboard bricks were quite heavy.
It's the second largest selling Pink Floyd album in history. I mean, that's a fact, isn't it? What can you say?
I don't know, is it? Yeah. I know it's sold more, in fact, than Dark Side of the Moon in North America, but worldwide, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure your figures are more up to date than mine.
I just out of interest, I noticed ABBA's greatest hits has been 300 weeks on the Billboard. Is that in danger of succeeding Dark Side of the Moon?
No, I don't think it can, because the only reason Dark Side of the Moon isn't still there is because they changed the rules. So 10 years after it comes out, they take it off the chart now, so nothing can be in the chart that long. There were all these catalogue albums that were in the charts, and they thought, this isn't what this chart's for. These things are selling anyway. This chart is to sell product. We don't want it cluttered up with all this old crap.
That's unfair, though, because you've got more people with more record buying money all over the world with more promotion, so they're going to buy more over records. So the rule, well, shame.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, so they didn't change the rule until after the Dark Side of the Moon had broken all the records and whatever, and I don't know how many weeks it was on the chart, or something, whatever. It was like 15, 16 years or something, but. So nothing can ever do that again, because once they hit 10 years, they'll be taken off automatically. So the whole thing's a joke, you know. It doesn't mean anything. I suppose they could do, you know, if they got really interested in kind of, you know, the WC belt of longest running thing, they could say, well, you could make a formula about the number of weeks it was on the Billboard chart, and then the number of weeks it's on this other chart, which is, you know, there's another chart, isn't there? It's called the catalogue chart, or the classic chart. It's all still in there,
yeah. Would you do it again? Another war show, a Berlin show?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because I have been asked to do it next summer, and I've said no. I was asked to do it in North America, and there was a lot of talk of doing it somewhere out in the wilds, and on July the 4th weekend, and creating some kind of massive pilgrimage so that people could all come and, you know, pitch their tents, and we could have a great, wondrous gathering of like-minded spirits, and the culmination of this weekend would be a performance of The Wall in the year 2000, as there'd been one in 1980 and 1990. And I said, well, no, I don't want to do that. And they said, and of course it would be free. We would do it free. And at that point I thought, oh, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. And started to talk about it and think, until I started to understand what free meant. Nothing's free. So I said, well, this free business, who's going to pay for it? Because as I know, you know, it's quite expensive. Berlin show cost about $6 million to put on, you know, for that one performance. And so, of course, I discovered who was going to pay for it, and who was going to pay for it. You can name any name, it doesn't matter, but you can say Coca-Cola. So it was going to be paid for by corporate America. So, oh, how nice of them, you know, and what do they get out of it? You know, because nothing's for nothing. And then I started to discover that the way they were going to distribute the tickets was by promotions, you know, like, so you know, buy 10 cans of Coke, you get a ticket to the show, or similar kind of thing. And I went, oh, I'll hold it right there. I don't want to hear any more about this, you know.
It's exactly the opposite to what the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like a clever way of you know, of the suits kind of subjoining all of that potential positive energy and delivering it to themselves. And it's exactly what I noticed with no disrespect intended to Sheryl Crow, whose work I admire, I have to say, but that whole thing that happened in Central Park last week, it was actually for, what was it, a new American Express card, was it, or something like that. So here was something like purporting to be, you know, rock and roll in all its kind of rebelliousness and freedom, and actually it's a big advert for American Express. I don't know. This taking over of rock and roll by, you know, by large corporations is a bit of a worrying trend in my view. A lot of shows you see big bands going out on the road, and you'll find that Volkswagen's written on all the tickets, or that or something. Well, among others, you know. Because they've been seduced by the numbers, and will, you know, scrape up every dollar from wherever they can get it.
How do you feel about the other guys now?
Well, I don't feel much about them one way or the other now, I'm happy to say. You know, when we parted company in the mid and late 80s, I went through you know, quite a galling time for a while. but I am content with my lot.